Chapter 1: Awakening. The first rays of dawn pierced through the dense trees, casting a soft glow into the hotel room of Chris. He covered his eyes with the small pillow he often carried with him, trying to drown out the glow and noise of the city, but he failed as always. He sighed as he opened his eyes reluctantly. "I must not forget to buy earplugs today," Chris said to himself. He yawned as he stretched in his bed. As if on cue, the alarm he had set suddenly went off, and he reluctantly pressed the button on his phone. Something felt off today. Chris usually wakes up relaxed. Today, however, it feels different. Suddenly, he remembered why today was such a big day. He'd be flying over the Pacific and had to be ready. Apart from the apparent fuel savings, flying over the Pacific is a long journey. Chris was also not a big fan of flying over the water, but the job had to be done. This shouldn't warrant such a weird feeling. He holds a pillow, yawns softly, and slowly sits up. Everything becomes brighter and clearer. He headed for the bathroom, grabbed his brush and toothpaste, and started brushing, feeling his body awakening slowly. As he brushed, he stared at his reflection in the mirror, his tired blue eyes and gray blonde hair. Chris is modestly tall and big, and his handsome look overwhelmed most people at the airport. It was a slow morning, but somehow, he finished his bath in less than 5 minutes. He took his dark blue robe and wrapped himself in it as he stepped carefully into his room. His outfit for the day was always the same, dashing navy blue pilot suit and his pilot cap. He was never tired of admiring himself in it. No, he's not a vain man. He's just a man who loves his job, and the uniform is also included. He spent an extra minute in front of the mirror today, taking part in his complete reflection. Why am I acting weird? Chris wondered. He grabbed his phone, keys, and small black wallet. This compact black wallet was a gift from his wife, and he always carried it with him. As Chris was about to leave the room, his phone rang. It was his son, Philip. "Hey, Dad. My boy, how are you this morning?" Chris was pleased to hear from him. Philip was a junior at the university and would be graduating next year. "I'm okay. How about you?" "Yeah, I am. I'm just about to leave the hotel for the airport. I flew from San Diego to San Francisco last night," Chris explained as he sat on the chair. "I'm heading for Hawaii this morning." "That's nice. I've heard the weather might be a bit bad today." Philip's voice carried a hint of worry. "It's still flyable weather. No worries. Anyway, I hope to fly back to San Diego this weekend." I'm suddenly homesick. Chris laughed loudly at his son's voice. Are you sure you're homesick, or don't you want to spend time with your girlfriend? Chris teased. Dad. Philip chuckles. I'll come back with Jackie together, okay? I miss you and want to come home for a few days. Don't mind me, son. I'll be home this weekend. You guys can come over, alright? Okay, I'll see you then. Fly safe, Dad. I always fly safe, Philip, Chris said as he stood again. Dad, come on. I know you're a great pilot. But still, fly safely, okay? Philip insisted. Chris, with a tired smile on his face, agreed. I will fly safely, Philip, Chris assured, his voice warm. See you guys this weekend, son. Great. Bye, Dad. I love you. Bye, son. I love you too. Chris ended the call. The expectation for the weekend and today's responsibilities mixed in his mind. Chapter 2, Virus Alert. As Chris stepped into the airport, his black face mask was around his face, and the coronavirus impact on the environment hit him. The usually bustling terminals were eerily quiet, with only a few passengers scattered around. People were wearing masks and maintaining distance from one another. For the past several months, the whole world has been suffering from a crazy plague, coronavirus. Even the air smells plagued. The airport was barely empty and now operating at a 50% capacity. He shook his head and went to the air personnel lounge to join his colleagues. As he entered, he saw all of them gathered in front of the television. Hey, guys. What's going on? He asked and moved closer. Hey, you. About thousands of people are dead as of this morning from the coronavirus. The air hostess, Cindy, said as she moved a little closer. Thousands, he exclaimed. Cindy nodded as they both faced the television. Reports also disproved the rumor that the plague was man-made, Cindy said sadly. Chris was now trying to listen to the news reporter, but this new information muddled his head. Also, humans might be in more trouble. We have artificially destroyed the ecological balance, making the Earth fragile, and the viral pandemic will continue, Cindy added. These viruses are mutating. But still no cure for the coronavirus yet. Chris asked no one in particular. None yet. They keep saying scientists are worried that the Earth may deteriorate, and we might all wind up dead. The air we're breathing is making us even weaker, Kevin, his co-pilot, came over and said. Chris stared. Are you all set for today? It will be a quiet flight with all these travel bans, Chris asked. Yes, ready as I will ever be, Kevin answered. There was a commercial break, and the little huddle of people disintegrated as everyone tried to return to whatever they had been doing. See you at the airport, Chris. Kevin ambled off for a coffee. Where is your route today, pilot? Came a young voice. He turned to see Lucy, his stepdaughter, with her smile wide and welcoming. Lucy, with her beautiful Asian features, had become a part of Chris's life, much like his own daughter. This summer, she took a student job to keep busy, which brought her unexpectedly into Chris's professional world. Chris has grown to love her as his own, and she, in turn, adored him like a father. San Francisco to Hawaii, his voice carried professional pride and familial warmth. I'm not on your flight. Too bad. Lucy pretended to be disappointed. I'm going back home to visit my mom next week. Her playful lament brought a smile to Chris's face and earned him a nod. With his hands in his pockets, he felt a peculiar tightness in his chest. What was this odd sensation? So, how is this job? Do you like it? Chris sipped his coffee. It's good. I'm learning so much. The vacation ends next week, Lucy responded, her fake eyelashes fluttering. I'm going home once it ends. I miss my mom's food. Sparkling with the mention of home, like many teenagers her age, she adorned herself with exaggerated false eyelashes that framed her joyful, ever-smiling eyes. Make sure you take care of your mom while I'm away, added Chris, his voice note of concern. Okay, I will, said Lucy, we'll miss you. I'll miss you and your mom too. And you. Chris paused. Make sure you're back home safely, okay? She smiled, her teeth straight and white. The room was filled with warmth. We'll wait for you at home. Fly safe, Dad. Take care of your mom, Chris reiterated, gently patting her shoulder. A silent promise of return hangs between them. The simple conversation, filled with care and concern, strengthened their bond, a testament to the family they have become, not by blood but by love. Chris was preparing to start work. He hesitated for a moment, and his thoughts drifted. He wanted to hear a familiar voice that always seemed to be around him. He pulled out his phone. Hi, honey, her voice like a soothing melody in his ear. Hi, love, replied Chris, smiling. I just want to hear your voice before I fly. It's a bit surreal here. Really? I can imagine, she said softly. How are you today? Chris chuckled, the tension in his chest easing slightly. Good. How about you? I'm good. But the house feels empty without you. I miss you. They shared their day. He seemed to seek comfort in the normalcy of their exchange. I'll be back this weekend, and I will have a week off, Chris assured her, his voice carrying a promise. Let's take a vacation. That sounds great, she said, her voice laced with longing. Just be safe, honey, we all will miss you. I will, don't worry, love. I love you. I love you too. Fly safe, honey. Chris felt warm and relaxed. With a deep breath, he squared his shoulders and headed toward the cockpit. He seemed ready to face whatever the flight held in store. Chapter 3, Skyward. This is your pilot, Chris Sullivan, speaking. We're currently flying over the Pacific Ocean. You'll see the glistening water if you look out your windows. I promise we'll be in Hawaii on time. So, please sit back and enjoy your flight. Chris put down the microphone and settled back into his seat. The cockpit was quiet, and Kevin was navigating their air route quite nicely beside him. He sighed as he kept doing his job. It was the perfect day to fly, but he still felt strange, as if something was gone. He tried to run through all the possible things bothering him, but the list was empty. Everything seemed excellent outside. Kevin suddenly chuckled to himself, a sure sign that a conversation was about to begin. Imagine if coronavirus makes us unable to fly forever, Chris. We probably have some sort of flying withdrawal symptoms. Chris laughed softly in response. Well, at least we are flying. I wonder when we'll be able to fly at full capacity. Talking about this virus makes me sad. People are dying, and people are losing jobs. Can we talk about something else? Chris asked. Kevin affirmed, keeping his gaze on the flying panel. My wife gets sad every time when we bring it up too. She has been working overtime at the hospital. It seems more people are getting sick. Chris was just about to respond when the plane suddenly jerked violently, causing the lights on all the panels to blink rapidly for a few seconds. What is that? Did you hit one of the rudder pedals? Kevin asked, confused. It happened again as Chris tried to answer. It was like the plane was being tossed from one side to another. Confused, he looked at the flight deck and the instrument panel. That isn't the effect of the rudder pedals. It feels like we hit turbulence for a few seconds or something, Chris replied, feeling a little bubble of panic in his chest. They both looked at the sky, and everything seemed clear. As they assessed their situation, the cockpit door opened, and one of the air hostesses dashed in, panting. "Captain, something was wrong. We have an alien on the plane." His first response was to laugh. "Aliens don't exist. Come on, Chloe. Are you guys trying to prank me?" "I don't know if he's an alien, but he is the one that caused the power surge or turbulence we just experienced. He has taken 3 guys down now." Chloe rambled like a frightened child. Her face was pale, and she looked like she was getting close to tears. Again, the plane was shaken. "I have to keep flying, Chloe. Is there anyone else to intervene?" Chris said loudly. "The force hitting the plane is too much to handle at this altitude." "Whatever that is, it is tampering with the flight controls," Kevin spoke loudly, and he instantly went into action, hitting the buttons on the flight deck. "Captain, we need you. Maybe you can talk some sense into him or something," Chloe cried. "It's too risky. You have to find a way to keep him away from the cockpit. Kevin and I need to balance the plane, Chloe. Please," he yelled at her, his eyes on the flight deck. Chloe dashed out, and Kevin and Chris struggled to keep the plane up. What kind of impact or force can he possibly be using? "I can't reach the air control traffic tower, Chris," Kevin shouted urgently as the lights in the cockpit flashed again. Something hits the door of the cockpit with a thud. Startled, both Kevin and Chris turned around. The door slowly opened, and they were shocked at what they saw. Standing by the door, in a brown bodysuit, was a tall guy with big black eyes and bulging muscles. He let out a scary noise. Before Kevin could react, Chris jumped out of his seat and tackled the guy to the ground. He felt the terrible energy that radiated from him as they struggled. He seemed to be way too powerful for him. "Keep flying, Kevin," Chris yelled, managing to overpower his assailant. But the attacker rolled over, attempting to gain the upper hand, and landed a painful punch on Chris's nose. Chris groaned, narrowly avoiding another blow to his face by ducking. The attacker's fist instead struck the plane's floor, sending a reverberation throughout the cabin. Frustrated, the guy screamed as his efforts missed again, his fist pounding the ground. He let out another wave of energy. The plane vibrates again, shaking violently. Chris could hear the wailing sound on the plane now. The siren only comes on when they're losing altitude. From the side of his eye, Chris saw a metal cylinder, a fire extinguisher. If he could reach it, he might knock him out. Distracted by this thought, his fist connects with Chris's face again. He didn't see the next blow coming and the one after that. He felt the energy draining out of him as he took over the paralyzing effect of his blows. He tried to reach for his face, but he was too weak. Just as the attacker failed to grab his face, someone hit him across the head with something, and he fell to the ground beside Chris, suddenly blacking out. Standing over him was Kevin, with a look of terror across his face. "Thanks, man," Chris breathed through his nose. Kevin didn't reply. His face told something that was every pilot's worst nightmare. Chapter 4: Beyond Turbulence. The next few minutes flashed by so fast, and Chris was sure he would never forget it in his entire life. He ran out of the cockpit into the cabin, and immediately, he saw the mess made by the attacker. Chairs were uprooted, broken bottles were scattered on the floor, and most alarmingly, passengers were hysteric. The flight attendant, Cindy, hurried toward him, concern written all over her face. "Oh, God, Chris. Are you okay?" Her jacket was rough and dusty. "I'm okay, Cindy. Can you please tell all the passengers to put on their life vests?" he murmured, barely above a whisper. Her eyes widened, and she covered her mouth with her hand, nodding silently. He moved closer to her, making sure the passengers wouldn't hear what he was saying. "Cindy, we have to act quickly. Both engines have failed. Remember to try to keep everyone calm. Kevin is doing his best now, but I must return to try an emergency landing on water. Get the lifeboats out immediately. Gather everyone on the plane and place them close by. We need to move fast once we land," he said calmly despite the frantic beating of his heart. Cindy nodded in understanding. She turned around and whispered to the few hostesses available. She reached for the microphone beside the wall. A few of them turned pale instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing some problems. I promise we are doing our best to fix them. However, we do need you all to put on your life vests now. Please do that as fast as you can because we are preparing for an emergency landing on the water," she announced in the calm tone she could muster. "Oh no, we're gonna die," a passenger suddenly yelled, and his voice filled with fear, echoing through the space. Chris wanted to tell them that they were not going to die, but the words got stuck in his throat. His silence made everything worse. Most people began to cry. "Please, put on your life vests immediately," he repeated with more urgency. The hostesses already had their vests on, and they started to move around to help the passengers. He joined them, helping the passengers. An older woman held his hand tightly when he drove past her, tears in her eyes. Are we going to die, sir? Chris squats down and gives her a tight hug. I promise to do the best I can so it won't happen, he replied gently. She nodded, shaking, as he helped her into her life vest. A flight attendant threw one at him, and he put it on immediately. His life began to flash before his eyes, filled with love and happiness. He didn't see this coming today, and he's not sure he's ready to die either. However, if this was his final moment, then his absolute obligation would be to his passengers. When he was done helping out, he hurried back into the cockpit, where he found Kevin worried and the attacker tied up on the ground. He dragged him into the toilet and locked him inside. Then he returned to see Kevin's face rigid. Chris, the engines have both failed. We have to land. Kevin repeated what he already knew. He settled in the seat beside him, equally worried. We can do this together. Chris tried to instill confidence, but even he wasn't sure. Two engines failing at once never really happened. However, here they were, both engines down, with no visible landing spot in sight. Maybe I should text my mom now. Do you think she will get it? Kevin asked in a panic as he ran a hand through his hair. He looked at the air route. They were still on course. She probably won't. Any words from the tower? Chris responded just as the plane shook violently again. Kevin shook his head. The whole plane suddenly started to shake again. Kevin gripped his hand tightly in fear. I thought you tied him up. Oh my God, we're going to die. He yelled in terror. No, we are not. Let's reduce the flight speed and altitude so we can land smoothly. Kevin, you know what to do. Chris commanded, gearing for the emergency landing. Inwardly, his family flashed in front of his eyes. Getting ready for landing, Captain, Kevin said quietly, tears streaming down his face. They both exchange a look. It is time. Chapter 5, Into the Unknown. When the plane landed on the surface of the water, they all felt it. Kevin and Chris leaped out of their seats and out of the cockpit. They got out and realized that the air hostesses had already begun to help people out. Some passengers were still screaming and crying, and a few looked hesitant to get out. Hurry up. We need to move faster. It's either that or we all die inside the plane, yelled Chris. The doors were opened, and the escape boat was out on the water, floating with a few passengers. The air hostesses tossed first aid equipment and a few packs of food. Kevin and Chris helped the passengers slide out of the plane. Chris worked feverishly, helping passengers out as fast as he could. Still, the attacker is nowhere to be seen. Chris glanced at the already filled lifeboat. Cindy was about to slide into the boat when he grabbed her arm. "Is there anyone else on the plane?" Chris asked Cindy. She shook her head vigorously, gripping a pack of supplies firmly with her hand. "No one. This is everyone," she replied with a nod. Chris helped Cindy out. For one last time, Chris looked at the plane, suddenly looking nostalgic. It was all about to go down now. Chris and Kevin dived into the water. "Paddle quickly. We need to be far away when the plane explodes." The men on the lifeboat held the paddles. Kevin and Chris were on both sides of the boat, and all the people paddled as fast as they could. "Don't look back," Chris yelled to the crying passengers, his teeth chattering at the coldness of the water. First, they all need to be away and safe. They paddled for the next 2 minutes when there was an explosion behind them as the plane slowly dipped into the ocean. The explosion caused the women to scream. "Don't look back," Chris yelled again as he swallowed hard, tears springing from his eyes. He felt the impact of the plane, even in the cold water. As the plane slowly submerged in the water, silence descends upon the lifeboat passengers. The fast paddling stopped, and then Chris and Kevin let go of the boat, swimming closer to each other. The only sound they could hear was that of the moving water and their tired breathing. "How are we going to find help?" Kevin asked, his teeth chattering loudly due to the coldness of the water as he floated on the water. "I don't know, man. We all gotta stay alive first," Chris responded, his body freezing up. He looked around, and a sense of fear pervaded the air. He wondered if there were sharks in this water, because if they didn't find help, they might get attacked by sharks first. He was still wondering about all this when something suddenly tried to pull him underwater. He struggled to stay afloat, flapping his hands frantically. "What is it?" Kevin asked with terror in his eyes. Chris couldn't reply because he was being dragged underwater. When Chris slipped underwater, he saw the brown guy's dark eyes again, swirling dangerously. With his second leg, he hit the guy's chest as hard as possible, and he managed to let go for a while. With that bit of opening, Chris reached for his neck, and he held on tight to it, trying to strangle him. He also wrapped his legs around his body, refusing to let go. Chris stays in the position for about a minute. With superhuman strength, he pushed them both upwards, and they hit the surface of the water. All those in the life vests scream as they take in deep breaths. "You're not going to kill me so easily, human," he said as he struggled against Chris's grip. "Oh, I think I can, you devil," "We're in this position because of you," Chris yelled back as he pushed him downwards, tightening his grip around his neck. He managed to pull him down, too. They remain underwater, struggling together and feeling dizzy again as they come up for air. "We're in this position because of you. All of you. This planet is so dirty and polluted that I can't resist. You all caused this." He sputtered, "With your pollution and terrible plague, all it does is just make me stronger." He yelled. "Well, whatever you are, you villain, you chose the wrong planet." Chris screamed into his ear as he wrapped one hand around his nose and dunked him into the water again. This time, Chris wasn't letting go until he gave up. They both struggled. His elbow connected with Chris's rib, and the terrible flash of pain caused him to loosen his grip around his neck. He used this opportunity to hit Chris's head with his hand. Chris was kicked downward into the ocean. Slowly, he felt himself losing energy. Mustering everything else in him, he launched at him one final time, and he lets his fist connect with the villain's face. The impact causes him to plummet deep into the water. The water around Chris suddenly felt different as he tried to swim upwards for air. He was coming back for him. Chris could see it. He tried to swim faster, but he was tired. Something began to bubble below him like a large dark hole. He was about to hit the surface of the water when he pulled him down again. Chris waited for the impact of his fist, but he didn't feel it. Instead, the dark hole below them was sucking them both into itself. Chris wanted to yell at Kevin and the others, but all that came out of his mouth were bubbles. Slowly, energy ebbed out of him as they were both sucked into this dark hole. He closed his eyes as he fell unconscious. Chapter 6: A New Horizon. The sound of the noisy wind hit Chris's ears. The air smelled clean and sweet. His face felt warm, and he could no longer feel the cold currents of the water, but he didn't realize this yet. Chris groaned, feeling a slight tenderness in some parts of his body. Slowly, he opened his eyes. First, what he saw terrifies him. Out in the open sky, there were two suns. Chris closed his eyes, and he opened them again. They were still there, glinting back at him. However, they didn't look blinding like the sun that Chris was familiar with. They looked dimmer than the sun of the Earth. Zooming past the sun, Chris could see tiny aircraft that looked like planes. What is going on? All of a sudden, his memories rushed back into his head. His head twists to the side in fear, looking for the villain. They had both been struggling in the water, but everything went black. Chris was shocked to see pretty tiny plants by the side of his face. "Where am I?" he whispered as he looked from left to right, wondering how he appeared on the ground where there were so many tiny orange flowers. There seemed to be no water in sight. Chris's heart beat faster. Is he dead? Is this the afterlife? He wondered. Slowly, Chris sat up, and everything else came into view. Right in front of him, a few meters away, was a shining blue tower glinting like crystals. Chris's mouth fell open as he stared at the enormous building, realizing they were probably made of genuine crystals. Beside them, from left to right, were various buildings made of the same blue-looking crystal. The difference, however, was their shapes. They were all built in different geometric shapes. Suddenly, something noisy buzzes past Chris, and he stares in wonder as two aircraft shoot past. They, however, didn't look like his familiar aircraft. They were both colored purple and silver, respectively. Chris got up to his feet immediately. He looked at his body and was surprised to find no wounds or scars. He remembered getting hit by the villain several times and bruised, but aside from that, the slight tenderness and pain in some parts of his body seemed good. Chris looked around, but no one was in sight. Behind him, the flower field seemed to go on forever, and the vast-looking blue crystal city in front of him. With a sigh and a determination to figure everything out, Chris stood up and walked to the blue tower. As he moved, purple and silver aircraft zoomed ahead past him. His mind flew back to the plane. Is everyone okay? Are they all here? This must be the afterlife, Chris muttered to himself as he inches closer to the tower. There was a tall orange door at the mouth of the tower. When Chris reached it, he realized that it didn't have a handle to grab. Almost immediately, the door shifted to the left, opening up for Chris. Taking a cautious step forward, Chris entered the building, and what he saw was mind-blowing. The tower extended far up above. The entire room was circular, so he looked up and saw the upper floors. He counted as far as 10 levels. Someone could throw something from the topmost floor, and it would land on the ground of the last floor. In the middle of the room, there was a large blank square screen and several screens on the walls by his left and right. Something in one of them catches his attention. Chris moved closer and watched in horror. He saw doctors who were wearing white coats and wheeling out what appeared to be corpses. The bodies were all covered by long white clothes, but he could tell. On the screen beside this, he saw people wearing masks, maintaining social distance outside a coffee shop. What sorcery is this? Chris whispered. He moved slowly, watching the events on the screen, trying to gauge what was happening and why these screens showed live footage of the world. His thoughts were so lost that he didn't realize he was no longer alone. Who are you? Someone asked behind him in a deep voice that caused his hair to stand, and he was slightly afraid that it might be the villain. He turned around quickly, arms up to defend himself. Instead, he found odd-looking people staring down at him. These people were so tall that it made him feel like an ant. They have piercing green and long curly hair. They were all dressed in silver garbs. The one in front of him seemed to be their leader, with a purple sign on his forehead. "Who are you guys?" Chris asked, a bit confused. They all remained quiet, their eyes assessing Chris. "I believe you are the stranger in our territory," the leader replied. Chris swallowed hard. This was not the time to play hardball. "My name is Chris. I'm a pilot, and I don't know where I am. I have no idea how I got here either. I remembered I was swimming in the ocean, fighting someone, and everything went black," he said softly. "Well, hello, Chris. I am KYRX, the leader with a purple sign on his head said friendly." Chris looked around, taking in the appearance of the others. "You look like a human. Are you a human?" Someone behind their leader says. The voice sounds like a female. "Yes," Chris nodded, "I guess I'm not on Earth." He asked. "No, you're not on Earth anymore. You're in our dimension, in Slumber City. Welcome to our land." "Thank you, KYRX. You look like not to be human." "You're not human." KYRX shook his head with a small smile as he moved toward one of the screens. Despite his towering height, he moved gingerly across the floor without making a sound. "We are the Lakantan tribe, the descendants of the Mayans. We are an extraterrestrial civilization." Extraterrestrial civilization. Chris repeated it, which seemed like a dream. "Yes. We have existed before humans, and our understanding and technology exceed that of humans. Our kind has existed for 8,000 years, KYRX said with his hands folded behind his back. 8,000 years. Wow. That's huge, Chris said with a nervous chuckle. KYRX returned him with a little smile. "It is. Now, Chris, tell me more about this person you were fighting in the ocean." The memories flood Chris's mind again, and he opens his mouth to begin. Chapter 7: Shadows of the Past. I was flying over the Pacific Ocean with about 20 passengers on board. Somewhere along the line, there was some turbulence, except the turbulence wasn't external. Someone or something hijacked our plane, Chris started to explain. By now, some of the Lacantans have returned to their work. They standing in front of the screens, some suddenly changed to satellite views. hijacked your plane. The female beside KYRX said. Yes, Ogla, KYRX responded, and he and Ogla exchanged a look that had Chris worried. That sounds like someone we know. What does he look like? KYRX asked, and Chris proceeded to describe the villain as well as he could remember. As he spoke, KYRX's face fell. He gestured for Chris to stop talking. KYRX stretched out his palm, and a large screen popped up. Chris was surprised when the video began to play. KYRX was playing the screen in a way that Chris didn't understand. I feared so. Is this him? KYRX asked, gesturing to the screen. Chris looked at the screen and watched as the villain descended upon their plane with a massive hit. That's him. He's the one. Chris said somewhat angrily, with surprise. Ogla sighed like KYRX. Chris kept glancing from one person to the other. Yes, Ogla, that is him, said KYRX. You know him? Chris asked. KYRX closed his hand, and the screen disappeared. Well, I'm afraid. I guess he finally went to the earth. That was Lizardman Irugi, Ogla replied. Lizardman Irugi? Who is he? Why the name Lizardman Irugi? You must know that he isn't a human. He isn't what you humans look like there. He is brown with spots and has very big black eyes. Lizardman Irugi is the nephew of the Lizardman King. Lizards are a super intelligent species, but they are isolated and have remained within their own dimension for centuries. Their world venerates power and dominion, unlike us, KYRX explained. 300 years ago, he tried to kill the older Lizardman King and seize the throne. He failed, thankfully. Underneath this tower is the Agartha Tunnel. Agartha is an underground corridor where the secrets of ancient civilizations and endless treasures are buried. It is a masterpiece of the Atlanteans. Back then, the Atlanteans knew that those who came from another world would face the disaster of nuclear war, which would destroy all civilizations. So, they opened the underground corridor. The corridor also leads to America and Africa. When the disaster occurred, the Atlanteans escaped to Africa and America through the corridor. Some of them lived in the promenade, KYRX continued. Wow! So how does this relate to Lizardman Irugi? Chris asked. Ogla took over from KYRX. When he failed his plans to take over the throne, he escaped from the tunnel here and tried to attack our city. He wanted to control us, but we caught him and shut him in the bunker below the tower just in time. Wow, he doesn't seem very powerful, Chris said casually. That is because our lycanthans have been guardians of these interdimensional gateways. KYRX paused. We have a tapestry that records advanced science, knowledge of the cosmos, and our culture. It sounds interesting, but how is this related to him? Chris asked with increasing curiosity, why is he on Earth? Shouldn't he be planning some revenge on you all? Why Earth? KYRX gestured around, indicating the vast city beyond the tower. This city, our home, is a testament to what civilizations can achieve. Technology and nature coexist, our energy sources are renewable, our materials are biodegradable, and we respect all life and nature. Such an environment helped our dimension. These powerful energies protect our city and prevent the spread of the lizardman's power, so we caught him easily. Chris was contemplative with a slight nod. At that time, the Earth was still healthy, and his power wasn't that strong either. Ogla continued. However, human destruction, pollution, and wastefulness have riddled the Earth with wounds. Especially the misuse of plastics, although convenient, but has severely burdened the environment. Furthermore, the massive emission of toxic gases from human factories and other activities have all weakened the power of the Earth. Now, the coronavirus finally has amplified his strength, allowing him to break through the bunker's barrier and escape. Chris was thoughtful for a moment and continued to listen to them. Irugi was raised in a valley near Slumber. Unlike other lizards, he could detect the stench of decay from worlds he had never seen across dimensions, as he was innately sensitive to the corrupt odors. This corruption not only increased his physical strength but also awakened a latent dark power within him. These powers made Irugi want to rule the lizard kingdom and kill his uncle. However, he failed, and he was exiled and erased from the collective memory of the lizards. He escaped to the valley, which connected to the Agartha tunnel. With the environment deteriorating on Earth, the corrupt odors increased his energies, but the constant noise pollution killed his normal brain cells, causing his neurons to mutate. These energies completely eroded his soul. He believed that by absorbing more energy from Earth, he would become increasingly powerful and finally return to the lizards, rule them and the world. He wants to rule the lizard tribe and the entire world. That's what he has always wanted, total power and control over us, others like humans and us. He will stop at nothing, Ogla replied, her face paled. Unfortunately, humans continue to develop selfish desires, leading to resource exhaustion. Plastics have disrupted the balance of the marine ecosystem. Wildfires and hurricanes are hitting your country, and many people have lost their houses. If humans don't protect and continue deteriorating the environment, the Earth will. KYRX trailed off, unable to finish his sentence. A sadness descended upon the three of them. Without help, the lizard man Irugi is powerful, The odors of Earth's decay provided him with an opportunity to invade, and the effect of the coronavirus somehow increased his powers. One of his powers is that he can affect the optic nerve of humans and make them see him as someone or something else. If he continues to exist and succeed, the human virus will not disappear. Oh, wow. Well, I guess I better find a way to go back home. I need to warn everyone, right? Chris said enthusiastically, but the Lacantons looked grim instead. By the time you return to Earth and get their attention, it may be too late. Action needs to be taken now, KYRX said. The two Lacantons exchanged a look when KYRX stepped forward, looking Chris in the eye. We need you. You have to stop him. Me? Why? How do I stop a powerful entity like that? Can't you do it? You're a lot stronger than me, Chris protested instantly. Chris, the coronavirus is slowly destroying the Earth. It is more threatening to humans because the ability of the lizard man has increased by 100-fold. The lizard man Irugi likes to eat all kinds of viruses and bacteria to enhance their power. So, his body is full of toxins right now, which causes any creature scratched or bitten by him to be infected with the virus and then melt into a blood pool. Only a human from the Earth can subdue him. You standing here after fighting him proves that point. We've tried several times, but no luck. He has become too powerful, and now we can only use our environmental advantage to prevent him from entering our territory, but we can't catch him. You must find him and lead him to the Crystal Lake. The lake water can extinguish his toxins, KYRX said softly. Chris shook his head slowly as he moved back, not quite willing to accept it yet. But there are other humans, KYRX. I just want to go home. My wife is waiting for me. Not all humans are righteous, Chris. We had foreseen this even before your arrival. The person to conquer him must be a person who has a kind heart and a righteous soul. Lizardman Irugi's poisons can't invade a righteous soul, Ogla said, stepping forward. Chris was a little confused, suddenly feeling tired and overwhelmed. What makes you think I'm righteous, Ogla? I see it in your eyes, Chris. You saved your passengers from dying by fighting off a creature stronger than you, said Ogla. You, Chris, are a righteous fighter. KYRX crouched down, placed a hand on his shoulder, and looked into his eyes. Chris looked up at him thoughtfully. Lizardman Irugi was the reason he was here. He might as well be the reason he made it back home. Chapter 8, Through Time. Chris stood in front of one of the screens while the Lacantons conversed. KYRX and Ogla's request was not ignored. going back to Earth without defeating Lizard Man Irugi could be disastrous. A series of images were occurring in Chris's mind rapidly. His beloved wife and their warm home, his children. They are waiting for his return. He recalled the promises made, a vacation with his wife, cheering for Philip in a marathon event, which is a path Chris had once tread. Also, Lucy is going to college. Chris wondered if anyone had noticed that he was gone. It hasn't been a day yet. Chris felt sad when he saw another doctor wheeling out a patient on a screen. Someone tapped Chris. He turned around to find Ogla crouched behind him and smiling at him. There was a thick orange crystal rod no longer than 8 inches in her hands. She raised her hands towards Chris and asked him to take it. "What is this?" "It's a Lacanter. It's a special weapon crafted by our ancestors a long time ago. We have, however, modified it. It possesses all you'd need to be successful in your fight against Lizard Man Irugi." Chris reached for it. It felt strong and sturdy in his hands. Chris used his other hand to rub the top of the Lacanter. The rod suddenly collapses like jelly in his hands and becomes a gun. Chris gasped at the weapon in his hand. "It will morph into whatever your need might be in the face of danger. It manipulates unlimited electric waves and light. You can trust it to help prevent poison and viruses into your body, too," Ogla explained. Chris touched the gun, and it suddenly switched back into a rod. "I'll definitely make good use of it," Chris promised as he slipped it into his pocket. At this time, KYRX was done talking with some Lacantans. Together with 3 other Lacantans, he was approaching Chris and Ogla. "Chris, they will be going with you, our best Lacanton soldiers. We've tracked down Lizard Man Irugi and believe he is at the forest of the Devil World," said KYRX. The 3 Lacanton soldiers stepped forward with silver bands against their wrists and arms. They were as tall as KYRX and also had the Lacanter tucked against their waists. "What forest?" Chris asked. "You will understand when you get there. Meanwhile, the Lacanton soldiers are here for your protection and direction. You will need help to find your way there. I suppose that will be all from our end here, Chris." Chris's face was grim as he ran a hand through his hair, slightly worried. "Hopefully, I will see you again, KYRX." The 2 grip hands tightly. Chris knew that he was about to embark on what might be a suicide mission. However, the hope gleaming in KYRX's green eyes gave him hope. "Hopefully, Chris," KYRS stood up. Chris turned around, and the soldiers led him to another door, far from the one Chris came in through. The door opened, and there was a vast field with similar orange plants that Chris had seen earlier. There's a wide path in the middle of the area. Just at the end, where the flowers stop, Chris saw something dark and looming. It looked dark and lonely. That must be the road to the forest of the devil world, Chris thought to himself. With one final look at all the towers, Chris and the 3 soldiers set out for the forest. Next to Chris is Vinta, the captain of the soldiers. There was a small aircraft waiting for them just outside the building. It was shaped like a speedboat, but below it was gleaming purple light, which seemed to make it float. Soldier Vinta crouched down to take him into the small aircraft, and the other soldiers were comfortably in it. You need to be ready, Chris. You might see things you have never seen before, but trust your Lycanter. What you need is what it would give, Vinta said to Chris when the aircraft flew into the air and zoomed across the flowers. In less than a minute, the aircraft had covered over 3 miles. Suddenly, it slowed down and moved downwards, a few feet away from the gloomy-looking forest. Chris and the soldiers got out, and the aircraft zoomed off almost immediately back to the tower. We're here, Chris. Take out your Lycanter immediately, said Vinta. There was a stone gate in front of the forest with an archway. Slowly, Vinta led them into the woods. Eerie sounds filled Chris's ears. Nothing sounds familiar or soothing. As they went deeper into the forest, the light from the sky reduced. The Lycanters they were holding lit up and illuminated their path. Suddenly, something big launched itself towards one of the soldiers. Instantly, the soldier reacted, and his Lycanter changed into a long electric spear. The instant the spear connected with the massive creature, there was a loud sizzling sound as electricity torched the beast. It made a weird wailing sound before hitting the ground with a thud. They are devil mice. Electricity kills them, Vinta whispered to Chris. The animal was as large as a lion. Chris saw its fangs as they passed by the dead creature. He shuddered all over. We're being watched, Vinta suddenly said, coming to a halt. They all stopped. Chris realized that all the eerie sounds in the forest had stopped. He felt the stares of the creatures on him, and he gripped his Lycanter harder. Chris, stay behind me. Fighters, bring out your silver bolts. Chris could sense the tension of the moment. A battle was about to begin. Chapter 9, Confrontation. In the blink of an eye, the 4 were surrounded by different creatures. Chris took a step back in horror as the faces of some of these creatures came into view. He saw a large tarantula. Some animals looked like monkeys. However, their eyes were larger than a monkey's eyes. Giant bulbs with eyelashes. Their 2 forelegs were covered with shiny scales, and the feet were like duck webs with 5 claws. Some other animals looked like cows, but they had 6 legs. Chris blinked rapidly. Perhaps it was all a dream, he wondered, but it was not. "Oh, damn," Chris muttered. The animals moved slowly with weird noises. The fighters have their silver bolts in their hands. They threw the bolts like javelins, and in midair, the bolts exploded with electricity and white mist, causing some animals to fall to the ground with loud shrieking noises. Some giant flying creatures that looked like bats managed to fly over the silver bolt's electricity, and they swooped down into the circle to attack the 4. Vinta grabbed his Lycanter, which switched to a purple flaming sword, and he attacked the bats, piercing through their long webbed wings. One of the flying creatures zoomed in towards Chris. With his Lycanter, he fought back, electricity dripping off the ready sword. They kept at this for the next few minutes. By the time they were done tackling the creatures, the other creatures ran away, some injured and some fearful. "Those are weird creatures." Chris's shirt and pants were soaked with sweat from exertion. "All creatures of the forest are like that," one of the fighters responded. As he tried to adjust his Lycanter, a long tree-like twine suddenly wrapped itself around his neck from the left and dragged him violently. Chris watched in terror. The Lycanter, in his hand, fell to the ground. Vinta acted fast as he ran towards the tree, dragging the soldier. He dodged one of its twines that kept reaching for his neck. With a mighty jump and somersault, his Lycanter changed into a gleaming purple axis, and he sliced through one of the tree branches. The tree shook violently, distressed, and dropped the fighter down immediately. "What is that?" Chris whispered to the other fighter, Russo. "Mutant trees. They work like snakes. They can strangle creatures from their necks and then eat them," Russo replied when Vinta helped the slightly injured man up. He grabbed his Lycanter and joined Chris and Russo. "Are you all right?" The fighter nodded as Vinta patted his back. "We need to move faster and carefully." Unlike the others, Vinta was not out of breath as he moved with agility. They all moved into the forest. According to KYRX, Lizardman Irugi was in the deep forest where the most dangerous creatures were. The rest of the creatures seemed to avoid them. The electric tang of the silver bolts in the air and their gleaming Lycanters seemed to be scaring the animals away. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps reached Chris's ears. When he wanted to ask what it was, Vinta grabbed him swiftly and pushed him behind a tree. Without a word, he pressed his Lycanter against the tree, and electricity destabilized the mutant tree. It shook vigorously for a moment and then stopped. Vinta then hid behind the tree, holding its trunk. Chris was next to Vinta, wondering why they were hiding. The two other fighters were hiding behind the nearest tree. Mammoths, Vinta explained in a whisper to Chris. Chris opened his eyes wide. Why are they so big? We don't have any on Earth again. Chris whispered. This is caused by human environmental pollution. Those nuclear leaks and their keep discharged nuclear wastewater have polluted the ocean. These animals were not as huge as before. We used to live in peace with them, but pollution materials from Earth have penetrated here and made them mutate. They are more aggressive now, Vinta added. They glance at them from behind the trees. The mammoths looked terrifying. Chris hid his head back and closed his eyes, feeling the repercussions from the ground. It would be a big miracle if he could leave this place alive. They all waited as the mammoths walked past, careful not to make a sound. When the mammoths finally moved past, Vinta gestured to the other two to come out. They all came out of their hiding place cautiously. Wow, my race really made a mess, Chris murmured, still shaken by the sight of the mammoths. You can say that again, Russo said. They continued their journey. This time, the creatures in the dark scurried past them. Chris saw a giant beast staring at him, and he shuffled closer to Vinta. They were now in the thick of the forest. Where is the crystal lake, Vinta? At the end of the forest. You have to drive Lizardman Irugi to the very end of the forest, Vinta responded. There was a sudden piercing noise like a bird shrieking. They all stopped in their tracks. What is that? Seems like we may be entering Lizardman Irugi's lair. Brace up. It's wartime. Chapter 10 The Final Stand. Up ahead, sitting with his legs crossed underneath him, was Lizardman Irugi. He seemed to be meditative with his hands up at both sides. Be ready, Vinta whispered to them all. Slowly, they crept around, hiding behind large shrubs. Chris's heart was pounding as he stared at the calm Irugi. Chris recognized the green spot on his face. How was he going to beat this large creature? He looked much stronger than before and didn't look as human as he used to. His biceps bulged, and his face had slight scratches. His skin appeared hardened and cracked. What are you doing? Vinta asked the second soldier, who had grabbed his Lacanter and was inching behind Lizardman Irugi to attack. Before he could react to Vinta, Lizardman Irugi's hand instantly shot out, slashing the soldier's face. In a minute, he melted into a pool of blood. Chris gasped when Lizardman Irugi stood to his full height. He was about 14 foot, or maybe more, and even over the Lacantans. I smell Lacantans. Lizardman Irugi yelled, the bones in his neck becoming prominent. Chris stepped back, hiding beneath the large shrub. Come out, wherever you are. Lizardman Irugi continued. Vinta tapped Chris. We need to lure him to the lake. We must make him think you're after something. Take your Lecanter. It can double as a small spaceport. We'll try to hold him back from hurting you, okay? Okay. Chris nodded vigorously and looked into Vinta and Russo's eyes. This might be the last time that they would see each other. With a final nod, Chris dashed to the left while Vinta and Russo dashed to the right. Their Lecanters shot huge bolts of silver energy at Lizardman Irugi. He blocked the power with his palms and roared loudly. The forest vibrated with a loud noise. Chris threw his Lecanter to the ground, and it immediately turned into a small spaceboard floating in the air. Chris jumped on it, and his feet were instantly keyed in place of the board. Vinta, let's go, he yelled. The board floated in the air toward the edge of the forest. Vinta and Russo ran behind Chris on their Lecanters. Lizardman Irugi ran after them, throwing dark balls of toxic energy at them. He threw one at Chris, but the spaceboard zapped upward while the ball hit a tree. Stop running, you cowards! Fight! Lizardman Irugi yelled. His hand reached out to grab Vinta, but Vinta maneuvered out of him. I see it! I see it! Chris yelled to Vinta. The spaceboards landed on the ground at once when the lake came into view. It was a beautiful lake with blue water, shining with colorful light from the bottom of the lake. The base was covered with silver and purple diamonds. When Lizardman Irugi realized that they had stopped, he halted in front of them. Their Lecanters turned into flaming silver swords. So now, you want to fight? Lizardman Irugi said sneeringly. His hand reached out for Russo. Russo ducked and slashed his hand with his flaming sword. With an irritated groan, his claws hit Russo. No! Vinta yelled sadly. Russo melted to the ground. Lizardman Irugi laughed, and the whole ground shook. Vinta rushed forward angrily and made a slash across Lizardman Irugi's arm. He howled and attacked Vinta. Vinta expertly avoided Irugi's attacks and tried to make more slashes. Irugi shot a dark energy ball at Vinta. The impact knocked Vinta into a tree. Lizardman Irugi turned to Chris now. A dark ball of energy brewed in his hand, and he shot it at Chris. Chris fell to the ground, and the Lecanter in his hand transformed into a shield. The shield protected him from the toxic energy. So you came all the way here to fight me? You little human. Lizardman Irugi asked contemptuously, and he hit the shield so hard. Chris fell to the ground the second time, and the shield flew out. When he was about to hit Chris right in the stomach, Ventus suddenly tackled him from behind to the ground. With his Lycanter in hand, he grabbed Lizardman Irugi's neck and made a small cut at his neck. Lizardman Irugi growled, and with his claws, he reached for Ventus' arm and scratched him violently. "No!" Chris yelled in despair and indignation from the ground as Ventus melted into a puddle of blood. Lizardman Irugi sneered with disdain and approached Chris slowly. Chris reached for the shield Lycanter beside him. A massive explosion of dark energy came from Lizardman Irugi, and Chris shielded himself as he kneeled. The pressure from the dark energy hit the side of Chris's arms. "Give up. I will destroy your world, and you can't stop me." The energy from Lizardman Irugi was so much that the Lycanter shield bent at the edges. Chris yelled loudly as his knees gave way, and he fell to the ground. His energy was seeping out, and his shield fell away from him. "Puny human, I will let you see my power and then kill you slowly." Lizardman Irugi kicked Chris's body into a tree. He fell to the ground, bruised. He grabbed him again and threw him to the ground. "I'm going to end you," Lizardman Irugi whispered in his ear. He grabbed Chris and raised him to his ugly face. Chris could barely breathe. His face was covered in mud, and all the bones in his body hurt. His vision was getting blurry. "Honey, open your eyes. You are the best. You are a hero." In the space, a familiar voice came through his ears, gentle and warm like the first light of the morning. "Honey, I love you. You can't lose. We are all waiting for your return." His wife's voice echoed repeatedly, breaking the chaos amid despair. He opened his eyes forcefully and stared at Lizardman Irugi, feeling a sudden surge of energy. With every strength he could muster, Chris balled his hand into a fist and punched Lizardman Irugi's eyes. Lizardman Irugi stumbled back, howling in agony, and dropped Chris. Chris lunged for the Lycanter a few inches away, which turned into a gleaming sword. He slashed Lizardman Irugi's shins. This towering beast blindly tried to reach for Chris, but Chris dodged, as the height difference between him and Irugi was too much, which became a disadvantage for Lizardman Irugi. He lost his footing, slipped, and fell into the lake ahead. The water sizzled, and then a loud explosion. Chris sighed exhaustedly and fell to the ground. Around him, the world was stationary. "Victory at last," he whispered. "Yes, you made it. You are one, honey." The gentle voice lingered like a promise of home. Chapter 11, The Return. Chris sighed when KYRX watched Lizard Man Irugi in the bunker. He lay on the ground, destabilized. After the crystal lake rid him of all his toxic power, Chris tied him with his Lacanta rope, which elevated Lizard Man Irugi in the air. Chris brought him out of the forest. Outside the stone gate, he met KYRX and other fighters. They placed Lizard Man Irugi in a bunker. He tried to escape, but KYRX had him injected with a paralyzing vaccine. Ogla cleaned Chris's wounds as KYRX pressed the button on the widescreen keypad. "What are you going to do with him?" asked Chris. "Even though he lost power, he will try to escape again. I'm not going to wait until then," KYRX said and pressed the button. Bright light filled the screen. Chris watched the light dim, and on the ground was a tiny lizard. "Wow! You took the lizard in his name seriously." Chris laughed. KYRX turned around with a smile on his face. Suddenly, the smile changed as his eyes widened, and he saw something behind Chris. The wormhole. It opens up in the next 5 minutes. You must leave now if you want to return to your planet, KYRX yelled. Good luck, Chris. Ogla hugged him. Then, KYRX grabbed Chris and pulled him along. Goodbye, Chris. Ogla yelled. Chris ran while turning around to wave at Ogla. The door to the tower opened, and an aircraft was waiting for them. Chris climbed on, and KYRX drove the plane into the broad field of flowers. In a few seconds, they reached the same spot where Chris appeared in their land. Chris got off the aircraft and walked to where there was a huge circle. In the next minutes, the wormhole will reopen, and you'll be sucked into the wormhole back to your planet, KYRX said, floating a few steps away. Thank you for being brave, Chris. You saved all of us, the entire universe. I did what anyone else would have done. Do you have Lizard Man Irugi's ring? That's the connecting piece to your planet, KYRX asked. Chris nodded. The ground suddenly began to move slightly as dark mist rose. You're a brave man, Chris. You're a hero. It was the last thing Chris heard before everything turned dark. His eyes were closed as the mist engulfed him. He felt weird as everything moved so quickly. Suddenly, he felt cold and unable to breathe anymore. He opened his eyes, and he realized that he was underwater. Excited, he looked up, flapping his hands, and saw the reflection of the sky. When his head popped out of the water, his face was greeted by the powerful sun rays. With a smile, Chris looked around, trying to figure out where he was. Up ahead, he realized that he was close to shore. He swam faster, eager to touch the beach after so many hours. The moment he reached the shallow ground, Chris ran out of the water in his white shirt and trousers that had been reduced to shorts. There were few people on the beach, but surprisingly, there were still people on the beach, and lastly, no one seemed to be wearing a mask. Worried, Chris covered his nose with his elbow as he walked on the sand barefooted. Chris looked around, trying to figure out where he was, but he couldn't figure it out. He kept walking, still looking around, till he reached the road. Just opposite the beach was a taco restaurant. Chris walked quickly towards the restaurant. Someone entered without a face mask, and Chris was alarmed. When he finally came in, he looked around and realized that there was nobody wearing masks. An older man in the corner looked at him in surprise. Ignoring him, Chris went straight to the counter. "Hello," said a young blonde boy whose name tag read Kyle. "Hi, sir, what can I get you?" "First, I'd like to get a face mask. Secondly, why are you open? And why are people coming in? The coronavirus is dangerous," Chris said a bit loudly. Kyle looked at him like he had grown 3 heads. "The coronavirus? That happened 20 years ago, sir. Are you sure you're all right?" Chris's eyes widened. 20 years ago. But how is this possible? The boy shrugged and looked at Chris doubtfully. Then, someone patted his shoulder from behind. Chris turned around and looked into familiar brown eyes. It was the old guy who was staring. "Chris, do I know you?" Chris asked tentatively. The man's mouth opened wide, and his eyes filled with tears. "It's me, Kevin." Chris took a step back in fear. It can't be possible. What is going on? Epilogue, New Dawn. The breeze blew past Chris's head as the car glided down the road. It had been such a long journey, but Chris was still excited. Yesterday, he met Kevin at the taco restaurant near the beach. Obviously, he had been away for 20 years. It didn't make sense at first when Kevin said it, but every time he looked at Kevin's face, the truth resonated again. Kevin was much older now. Chris sat next to him. Kevin drove carefully like an older man. He wore older people's glasses. "You saved everyone's life that day." A cruise ship passed by just in time, and we were all saved. "We thought you were dead." They searched a vast area around the landing site, but they didn't find you. Kevin had told him the night before at his house. As for the coronavirus, things got better. The pandemic really hit us, but everything is back to normal now. The world has become peaceful and beautiful, with no wars for many years. Chris heard all the better news from Kevin that night. Everyone is working hard to protect the earth and the environment. There have not been any strange viruses again since then. People also no longer use plastic. They use various eco-friendly products. Now, Chris's mind shifted to happier things. His wife was waiting for him in their home. Philip, Lucy, and grandchildren would all come down to visit him. Kevin took a left, and Chris suddenly became nostalgic. He missed his street. Looking around, he realized that a lot had changed. Chris suddenly gasped when his home came into view. At that moment, a figure of elegance caught his eye, the woman he deeply cherished, his wife. Though age had touched her, her beauty remained undiminished. Standing at the door, she watched their car approach slowly. The trees in the front yard grew tall and majestic. The lawn still remained impeccably neat, and the flowers by the door brimmed with vitality. The house looked as beautiful as ever. Inside, Chris felt excited at the thought of returning and seeing his love again. Kevin parked the car on the side of the road. Chris, covering his mouth with his hand, gazed out the window. Kevin put a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. "Welcome home, Chris." Stepping out of the car, Chris walked towards quickly and embraced his wife tightly. That moment, everything fell silent, with only the sound of their heartbeats each other. "Sorry, my love," Chris said, tears in his eyes. "I came back late." "No, you didn't. You have always been by my side," she said excitedly, filled with tears. "We have never been separate. I met you in my dreams every night." He looked bewildered. "When I was on that alien planet, I always felt you were beside me. I thought it was just a dream." "No, honey, that was true. We have always been together these years, supporting each other and loving each other," she said with a smile. "I saw you saved everyone on the plane. You fought with the lizard man, and those tall green-haired aliens, strange creatures in the forest, as well as all the dangers you faced. And finally, you won." Her voice was gentle and filled with nostalgia, and her eyes sparkled with deep memories. "On those long nights, I really wanted to stand by your side. I tried to reach you, but I couldn't cross the silver boundary of dreams. However, I always felt like a big power pushing me, guiding my voice to whisper in your heart." They embraced again, their hearts merging in a renewed bond of love and unity. On this peaceful night, may all beautiful dreams surround you, cradling you into a night of good sleep. Good night.